Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Welcome to this event, an hybrid event with participants online and participants uh, in the pavilion, Nature-Based Solution and Ecosystem Restoration Decade Pavilion. I am Christophe Bezacier. I am leading the Forest and Landscape Restoration Mechanism in the Forestry Division in FAO in Rome. And I am also the leader of the task force on best practices with another colleague in FAO. As you know, a UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration has been proclaimed by the General Assembly in March 2019. Aiming to halt, prevent, and reverse ecosystem degradation worldwide. This UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration has been launched officially in June 2021 on the occasion of the Environmental Day on June 5. And this UN Decade is co-led by UNEP and FAO. There is a strategy available online on the website of the decade, released in September 2020. And we have established an advisory board for the governance of this decade. 5 task forces have been established. One is on youth, one is on finance, led by the World Bank, one is on monitoring, led by FAO, one is on best practices of restoration, led by FAO, and this is the one I am the co-leader. And there is a science task force, led by IUCN. Today, this side event is co-organized by the science task force and the task force on best practices. We will have the opportunity to present some products, knowledge products, already developed in the context of those task forces. One think piece developed by the Science Task Force to be presented by Luc Nyakaja and Mrs. Andrade. The principles on ecosystem restoration that we established with the Task Force on Best Practices to be presented by James Hallett. Before jumping in the presentation with the 3 panelists, we have a Menti pool. We have some questions for you. So I would like to ask you in the meeting room, but also people online, to join at menti.com using your smartphone. You can insert the code 90776962, and we would like to have your answer on the question: what is essential to achieve effective ecosystem restoration? From your perspective, you can answer what you want. I will let you 2-3 minutes to join the menti.com, to add the code, and to put your answer to this question. And we will show some results on the screen in 2-3 minutes. And then we will present what we are considering good principles for restoration. Benjamin? C'est bon pour 2 minutes, tu me dis? Oui. Already some answers. Can we share the screen with the Zoom to see the answers coming? Sorry, we are trying to test techniques and interactive options, so hopefully we will see the result. Ah. Andrea is disconnected. So if you... Okay, as it seems that we have a technical issue, we will show the result maybe in few minutes, and I don't want to postpone too much the presentation. So I will give the floor to Luc Nyakanja. Luc is the founder and president of Governance and Policies for Sustainable Development, a think tank whose mission is to make governance system more conducive to sustainable development. He was one of the architects of the LDN land degradation neutrality concept, now embedded in the 2030 agenda with the SDG target 15.3. And Luc is the chair of the Science Task Force, and he will introduce to us the Science Task Force think piece. So, Luc, you have the floor, and I let you.
Well, thank you, Christophe, and good afternoon or good day to you all here in person or online. I have been granted the privilege of being the chair of the STF, one of the 5 task forces supporting the implementation of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And my job is to facilitate the work of these, well...
Now, this is the result of the Menti.
Huh.
So it's giving to us the keywords proposed by the participants, both here and online. Thank you for sharing. Let's move back to the presentation. Sorry, Luc.
Yes, thank you. And you have noticed from the Monty that funding is the key word, the most of the word coming on. So I have been granted the privilege of chairing, facilitating the work of the STF. The STF stands for the Science Task Force, one of the 5 task forces to support the implementation of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And as someone who has been most of the season of my career have been rather a policy maker, the task of facilitating the work of these renowned scientists has been rather sobering but enlightening, and I have very much appreciated. I would like to express my appreciation to you, Mrs. Andrade, but you have Mike Ackerman, Game Shure, Bernardo Strasbourg, Priyash Semfunda, and James Cairo. Our work, you will see today, the first for this year, is the think piece. Let me introduce you to our mandate. Our mandate is to provide, as an authoritative reference point for the decade, the scientific backstop for the Decade Advisory Board, as well as the strategic group being UNEP and FAO. And we can also, from our midst, choose some topic, select them and welcome them, or also receive mandate or request from FAO and UNEP. The work for this year is the think piece, and that's the one I'm going to introduce you to. First, the think piece has brought some answers to 4 fundamental questions and provided 5 key messages that Mrs. Andrade will introduce you to, and a few lists of recommendations. Now, about those 4 questions, the first one is, what does it mean to undertake ecosystem restoration? In fact, why do we need to restore ecosystems? You will hear more of that from most of us today, but humanity has degraded large proportion of our seascape and landscape. And unless we really swiftly move to bring those ecosystem back to functioning, to thrive again, we are likely to experience more of the events that are threatening the functioning of our ecosystem, even our personal well-being. Ecosystem restoration constitutes action to prevent and help ecosystem degradation, as well as reversing the loss of ecosystem integrity, bringing the functions back to life. And it is something that supports economies. Is not to choose restoration versus economy. Is in fact restoring is supporting, and we support a thriving economy in a sustainable manner. So the second question is, why have previous restoration efforts been only partially successful, and what needs to change? First, it has been, well, I won't be exhaustive here, but we need to make sure that ecosystem restoration is science and knowledge based, and it is context specific and people specific. Unless we do it that way, we're likely to continue to fail. That is why we are really pleased to present our finding to you. The third question is, how can individual, group, and sectors contribute to effective ecosystem restoration actions? We all can and have to contribute. Being a producer, being a consumer, being a citizen, being a policymaker, we all have to consume. It is a call for a societal change. It goes through the improvement of our institutions, and including the budget processing that will ensure that our subsidies doesn't go where they will rather enhance degradation processes. And the fourth question is, what key action can multiple sectors of society take to ignite and sustain a long-lasting ecosystem restoration movement? Yes, partnership, responsibility, but you will hear from Mrs. Andrade the key messages that will address all those points. Thank you very much. Christophe?
Thank you, Luc. Now I will give the floor to James Hallett. He is the co-chair of both the Global Partnership on Forest Landscape Restoration,
So the future of the
and
peace is
the
in your hand now.
co-chair of the Society for Ecological. He is a professor at the University of Montana, and he will present to us the 10 principles we have prepared in the context of the Task Force on Best Practices. Jim, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Christophe, and welcome everybody to this. So used to having that on, I can't bear to take it off. And welcome to the session here and online. I'm going to present the work of a large number of individuals, and I'm honored to be able to do that. Ecosystem restoration includes a very wide range of restorative activities. It's shown here in a graph that the Society for Ecological Restoration developed a couple of years ago, that from reducing societal impacts to trying to partially and then fully recover ecosystems are all part of ecosystem restoration. Now, why do we need principles? We need principles because we have learned from our experience in restoration that there are certain key things that need to be considered when we begin a restoration project. And this has been shown by the Society for Ecological Restoration, but the release of the NBS standards has principles for rewilding, forest and landscape restoration principles, and those for the food and agriculture sector as well. So how then do we expand from what has already been presented and develop principles that are relevant to the entire UN decade? So we began with stock taking of all the published principles out there. We developed a set of draft principles based from 15 key publications to develop a set of headline principles. We then had a meeting, a global forum that included IUCN, CEM, SER, and also members of the Best Practices Task Force to revise these and develop descriptions of them. Then we asked for feedback on the proposed principles and descriptions from this group of people. And this product then went to be part of the UN Decade Launch document, the draft principles. So our final steps were a global consultation. Over 350 people from around the world provided input into these principles. We revised them subject to the global consultation with a small writing group, and they're being released here today, and I'm very excited about that. Our next step then, of course, is to draft standards of practice that support these principles. Okay, so 10 principles for 10 years of the decade. The first one is an overarching principle that ecosystem restoration contributes to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and also those of the Rio Conventions, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention to Combat Desertification, and then also the Climate Convention. Oops, I skipped. This is on auto. The second principle is that ecological restoration is going to promote inclusive and participatory governance, social fairness, and equity from the start and throughout the process and outcomes. So in other words, we're engaging stakeholders who are directly or indirectly affected by restoration activities. Principle number 3 posits what has already been mentioned, is that ecosystem restoration includes a wide variety of restorative types of activities. Again, as shown in the restoration continuum here, so that people can have a positive effect in either reducing degradation or improving ecosystem function. Our fourth principle is that restoration is aiming to achieve the highest level of recovery for biodiversity, ecosystem health and integrity, and human well-being that is possible for that system. And so we want to aim high and hopefully reach that target. Principle number 5, another very important one, is that our restoration is addressing the direct and indirect drivers of degradation. If we can't stop degradation, all of our restoration activities are for naught, because it's just not possible. Our sixth principle, alluded to earlier by Luke, is that we're going to use all kinds of knowledge that includes Western knowledge, scientific knowledge, but also traditional and local ecological knowledge to move our enterprise forward. And that there's free flow of information across the stakeholders that are involved in the restoration. And that includes new knowledge that's developed as a component of the restoration process. Principle number 7 is that we're going to define short, medium, and long-term ecological, cultural, and socio-economic objectives and goals. So we have to have something that we're looking forward to, something to plan towards within the decade. Principle number 8, Luke also mentioned, is that we're tailoring our ecological restoration, or our ecosystem restoration activities to the local ecological, cultural, and socio-economic context, while viewing it within the context of the larger landscape or seascape. Because on the larger landscape, that's where most of the ecological functions are taking place. Principle number 9 is that restoration is going to include monitoring, evaluation, and adaptive management throughout and beyond the lifetime of the project or program. So in other words, when we initiate restorative activities, we want to find out whether we're actually having impact or not. And that's crucial, because if we can't measure whether we're being successful in our activities, we can't learn. We can learn from failure, and we can be very happy with success, but if we don't have any mechanism to monitor And this can be through stakeholders. There's a wide variety of options for that. And finally, principle number 10 is that ecosystem restoration is enabled by policies and measures that promote its long-term progress, fostering replication and scaling up. So in other words, we want to build from smaller projects into larger programs, and we need an enabling environment to do that. And finally, I want to just announce that the principles are available for free download at this FAAO website. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. Now I will give the floor to Angela Andrade. She's the chair of the Ecosystem Management Commission of IUCN. Additionally, she's also the chair of the Climate Change Task Force in the IUCN Council. She serves as Director of Climate Change and Biodiversity Policy at Conservation International in Colombia since 2009, and she will present to us the key messages from the Science Task Force. Angela. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I have the task to. No? It's okay? It's working? Okay. So the Science Task Force. It's okay? But they cannot hear. Okay. Okay. So the work of the Science Task Force started at the beginning of this year. And as Luke mentioned already, we were a group of people together with Adriana, and who also serve as a coordinator of many of our activities. We spent quite a lot of time to arrive to these 5 key messages, which are directly connected to the principles that were just presented. So the first key message is that ecosystem restorations offers multiple benefits that can be evenly distributed. It's important to recognize that ecosystem restoration, as we know, can produce multiple social and environmental benefits, including, for example, enhancing human health, well-being, helping mitigate and adapt to climate change, improving water quality, reducing soil erosion, and preventing species extinction, among others. But it's important to see that these outcomes and benefits and cost may occur in different time and temporal scales. In many cases, we would like to have immediate results, but this is not the case of ecosystem restoration. Understanding the distribution of cost and benefits are associated with restoration actions, this is critical because aggregate benefits can hide significant imbalances, with benefits skewed towards a few stakeholders and costs borne by others. Inclusive engagement in restoration planning may enable more equitable distribution of net benefit and increase the potential for a long-term success. The second key message refers that key enabling conditions, particularly local norms and governments, can tip the balance towards restoration. Effective restoration entails negotiating and balancing multiple objectives. And for secure tenure, property, and use rights are critical foundations for local governance. And the government incentives are particularly important for promoting restoration of non-monetized public goods that are non-attractive to private sector investment. The scaling up and the dissemination of ecosystem restoration may call for the phasing out of counterproductive policies and subsidies, and the repurpose of resources for conservation and restoration. Integrating and harmonizing traditional and scientific knowledge is essential to foster effective restoration actions, especially in certain areas. Where key enabling conditions are not present, it's often critical that additional resources may be or are required to invest to create them, building local capacity, engagement, and motivation. The third key message is, says that effective ecosystem restoration requires managing trade-offs equitably. The issue of trade-offs is essential for ecosystem restoration because we can have ecological trade-offs or social trade-offs. So to ensure success, it is crucial that different perspectives, goals, and needs of stakeholders are communicated and accounted in a spatially explicit manner through participatory planning. Nature's contribution to people vary over time and space, and restoring these contributions may create winners and losers and inescapable trade-offs. So robust spatial planning to support the decision-making process can ensure that decisions are taken are ecologically sound and cost-effective. National governments, international organizations, local communities, and other restoration stakeholders at the national level need to identify and prioritize locations and approaches for restoration actions that balance benefits, costs, and risks. The key message 4 says that finance and market infrastructure is critical for scaling up and sustaining ecosystem restoration. So restoration needs greatly exceeds budgets of national governments, international donors, and multilateral development banks, filling the estimated US $3 billion shortfall will require financing from public and private sectors. The potential of restoration to address multiple global challenges has stimulated the development of several innovative financial systems or instruments, including those that supply capital and mitigate risk. Matching financial instruments to the scale of opportunities available require significant modification to current private sector operations. And also a restoration economy can mobilize local stakeholders through livelihood enhancement, job creation, business development. And the final key message refers to adaptive management and monitoring these are keys to effective and long-term restoration actions. So here we have some key areas in which we say that transparent monitoring, evaluation, and adaptive management are integral and cross-sectional components of the ecosystem restoration process. Capitalizing on good practices for ecosystem restoration relies on learning from both success and failures. High restoration aspirations stimulate actions and motivate engagement and commitment, but failure to achieve ambitious goals can discourage action, reduce investment, and generate distrust. Incremental moving restoration targets are likely to be more effective than static targets. A baseline of ecological and social data and analysis are key to produce robust restoration action plans. Local communities can be actively engaged in the design, assessment, management, and monitoring frameworks and tools, so in the full process. And monitoring indicators should incorporate information on broader societal outcomes. These are the main results of the work, but of course you can review the document that is available already, also on the website of FAO and IUCN, and this is just a summary of the main results, but the text is quite extensive, and you can look for any specific information related to any of these topics. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Angela. And I would like to take over and present to you our recommendations. There are just 5 of them. Those recommendations are about how to build the ecosystem restoration movement. This is about how to bring you on board, and through you bring on board what we call the generation restoration. the one that will transform the way we really manage our ecosystems. First, ecosystem restoration opens new opportunities for engagement, learning, and innovation through development of long-term partnership and collective action. Ecosystem restoration is likely not to yield positive outcome in the short term, though there might be some low-hanging fruit, but it takes some time to reap the benefit of ecosystem restoration. Second, community and landscape right holders and stakeholders need to be recognized and empowered as stewards, property owners or users, and local decision makers. It is important to rather ensure that the movement is bottom-up instead of being top-down. Third, ecosystem effective restoration action requires fundamental shift in economy and policy institutions towards a focus on the long-term and varied benefit of functioning and diverse ecosystems. You have heard that there is a shortfall of $300 billion every year if we really want to live up to our ambition to restore our ecosystem. And regarding terrestrial ecosystem, it's not a matter of commitment. Nowadays, we have up to 1 billion hectares of landscape already committed for restoration. What we need is effective action. And one thing I wanted to add is if we have a shortfall of $300 billion, we still have a lot of ill-designed, counterproductive subsidies that are being used in agriculture. 700 billion of US dollars being used in agriculture, and only 3% of it is used for conservation and producing the commons. So the third point is therefore the third point is to ensure that we repurpose those subsidies towards number one, conservation, and number one, restoration. Our fourth recommendation is the ideas of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration in partnership, inclusiveness, and joint coordinated action need to be based on shared core principles. You have heard about them, good practices, and approaches to monitoring and evaluation. And here, the monitoring must also include those who are taking action at the local level. It shouldn't be just a top-down monitoring. It must be all stakeholders involved into the process to ensure that it is delivering results, learning lessons from all perspectives. And the last one is ecosystem restoration action requires user-friendly information sharing and inclusive engagement from the onset, creating opportunities for multiple agents of change to work together, particularly at sub-national levels. So this is important for us, so we all are committed here to ensure that the package we are presenting to you will be further worked on to make it available for you in user-friendly manner. And feel free to get back to us and provide feedback on how we could do better. One thing I have forgotten to mention is that the STF is skillfully coordinated by Mrs. Adriana Vidal, and she's our reference point, and you can get back to us through adriana.vidal@iucn.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luc, for this very comprehensive presentation. So after those two presentations on the key messages from the Science Task Force and the 10 principles, we are moving in a second part of our session on capacity for restoration. And before presenting to you the key findings of a global survey we implemented to assess the needs in terms of capacity building globally, we have a second question for you with the Mentimeter. You have already now the you know already how to join at manti.com. You can use the same code we use for the first question. And you can answer to us, to this question, from your own experience. What are the knowledge and skills priorities to achieve global restoration goals? I'll let you 2-3 minutes. We have almost 100 participants online, so we will try to show the result of this question. Ben, you manage this with our technique in 1-2 minutes. So we have some keywords. Interesting: communities empowerment, community organization, building local capacity. It seems well aligned with what I will present in a few minutes. 1 more minute. Yeah, more and more answers. Benjamin, tell me when it's okay. We can close this this Mentimeter session, and it is very interesting to see that your feeling is not far from the reality we received with the online survey. So I will present to you the key findings of the global capacity need assessment we managed to prepare in the context of the task force on best practices. This task force is a huge group of more than almost 140 members from almost 60 organizations. And in our outputs, in our terms of reference, we have 2 products that are key. The capacity need assessment I will present to you now, with the idea to develop a knowledge and learning plan for the decade. For this capacity need assessment, we managed to prepare a survey in the context of the task force. We tested this survey in December 2020, and from February to May 2021, we collected data online. The survey was online on the UN Decade website, and we received more than 1,331 answers. And now we are finalizing the summary report. I am presenting to you this summary report today, and the full summary report will be online by Friday. And building on this report, we will prepare the knowledge and learning plan. From our survey, just to give you the flavor of who and from where we receive answers, most of the answers came from Africa and Asia Pacific, almost 50% of the answers. A lot of respondents were from the forestry community of practice, but we had also a lot of answers from the farmlands community, mountain ecosystem, freshwater ecosystems. It seems that we were a bit weak in terms of dissemination of the online survey in the marine and urban areas group. So we are trying now to have more specific questions with an interview with stakeholders of those communities to be sure that we are integrating them properly. The questionnaire was built on several stakeholder groups representation, government, NGOs, and other partners at national and international levels, local and subnational government, district, communal level, NGOs, and local communities. The research and education group, academic university research organization. The group of investors, donors, private sector, and more development banks and financing actors. And land user communities, local communities, interest groups. We received a lot of answers from the group one, the government, NGOs, and stakeholders at national level. It was a bit difficult for us to mobilize for this survey the investors, donors, private sectors group. But we have, nevertheless, a sample relatively big and with interested answers. What are the major gaps we identified? Some are common in the two bubbles, first bubbles, to the local and subnational government and the national level government. One key need is mobilizing financing instruments, stakeholder engagement, and we can find again the keywords we had on the Mentimeter. Planning, assess ecosystem degradation, assessment of ecosystem degradation, implementation with how to build restoration on sustainable supply chain, policy action for effective and inclusive ecosystem restoration, planning, again, implementation for local and subnational government. The research and education group focused more, considers the gap in terms of knowledge more focused on decision support tools, models, guidelines for restoration, assessment of cost and benefits of ecosystem degradation and restoration, enhanced capacity and support services. The investors, the donors, and the private sector group focused their answers on sustainable financing, the need of, in terms of long-term funding mechanism, innovative financing solution, the risk-sharing mechanisms, management of the risk in terms of investment in restoration, with the idea to assess investment to prepare bankable business plan and business models. Finally, the land user, local communities and interest groups, again, highlights the fact that there is a need on mobilization of financing instruments. They want to have more support in terms of organizational capacity and development of their capacity, documentation of traditional practices, helps them to establish cooperatives and to build sustainable value chains. And they have a demand clearly and a gap of knowledge. They are considering there is a gap of knowledge on implementation and monitoring at community-based level, land use conflict issues, etc. You will find more details in the report. What are the next steps? So we are finalizing the regional report, and we will start the preparation of the learning and action plan. Based on this learning and action plan, we will try to identify existing knowledge product and initiative. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we will try to capitalize all the tools, knowledge, guidelines, methods that are already available. But of course, we will probably identify some gaps in terms of products. So we will draft terms of reference of new knowledge products. And we will start to develop those new knowledge products in early 2022. And it will be an iterative process during the decade. We will try to improve the tools and methods during the decade and to propose new knowledge products during the decade. The overview of the summary report. So you have a more detailed presentation of what I just presented in few slides. It will be available online by Friday on our website. It's in the final step of design and clearance internally in FAO to be published. Finally, I take the opportunity because we will probably present the knowledge and learning plan in May 2022 at the World Forestry Congress to be held in Korea on building a green and healthy and resilient future with forests. It will be organized from 2 to 6 May 2022 in South Korea. You are invited for interested participants to register online with an early bird registration option in before November 2021. For more information and registration, you can visit the World Forestry Congress website. There is a Korean pavilion here in the area with more information. And we will have a lot of restoration activities and restoration events during this World Forestry Congress, more focused, of course, on terrestrial restoration. It will be the community of foresters. But it will be an opportunity to highlight the activity of the decade in a global event in Korea in the coming year. Thank you for your attention, and I give the floor to Benjamin for the interactive session now.
Thank you, Christophe. You can hear me with the microphone. My name is James in the reader, and we've heard from this distinguished panel. You don't hear it? You hear now? Yes. We've heard from the distinguished panel of speakers about the key principles, the recommendation, as well as the capacity development needs assessment carried out. So it's my pleasure to give the opportunity to you all here in the audience, if you have any burning questions to ask the panelists. Please direct your question to one of the panelists team specifically. And afterwards also we give the floor to our more than 100 participants online to also ask 1 or 2 questions. So the floor is open. If you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Actually, my question is not so much along the lines of the presentations, because I found all these kind of principles very interesting, but I have a more concrete and down-to-earth question, which comes from a personal experience. I have a piece of land inherited from my ancestors. It was a beautiful forest many years ago. When I inherited it, it was all restocking by eucalyptus. I removed the eucalyptus thinking of forest restoration, but what I got back in return was more eucalyptus, because there's many of them surrounding the piece of land, and it's a very fast-growing opportunistic species. So my very concrete question to any of you in the panel, on the basis of your down-to-earth experience, in forest ecosystems, can you really leave nature alone to restore itself, or you have to force it, for example, by planting the kind of trees that you know were part of the original forests? That's my concrete question.
For that question, and it refers to what I mentioned earlier, is that context is very important. And so within that landscape context of eucalyptus trees, yeah, you've got a very good competitor that wants to continue. So if you can work with the surrounding landowners, you may be able to put a stop to that. That would be the only direct recommendation I have. And knowing what was there prior is also valuable if you can get seedlings or seed stock to promote. And sometimes just working within small areas and building out is an approach that would work. But eucalypts can kill things. That's just the way they work.
Thank you. Another question here.
Thank you very much. Alejandro von Bertrap from the GIZ, the German Cooperation Agency. I first of all, congratulations on this, these thoughts around the principles and the surveys you've been doing. I think it's fantastic to have this sort of guiding principles. However, from my own experience, I find that it's extremely difficult to really reach some of those principles, or really to incorporate some of those principles, particularly those dealing with the perspectives of local communities and the perspectives of the people promoting the restoration, which oftentimes comes from research institutions, universities, because sometimes there's very much a conflict there in terms of which ecosystem services one group favors over the other. Did you sort of analyze any of those sort of problematic issues in restoration practice when coming up with this, or is there any sort of publications which have perhaps a more critical approach towards sort of understanding this sort of epistemic divisions, so to say, in restoration?
Thank you very much. I think Christophe want to answer?
Yeah, I can start, and maybe James will complement, or any other panelists. But just to say that when we decided to prepare those principles, those 10 principles, the idea is not to be prescriptive, but to give a vision. What is good restoration, ecosystem restoration? We are leading a task force on best practices. We want to collect good practices at scale in different contexts and ecosystems, and to also give maybe a label to all existing good practices collected in the context of other platforms, Panorama, WOCAT, etc. And those principles will be a framework to help us to analyze. And we know that it's difficult to achieve the 10 principles in a particular site for restoration. But for the practitioner, it could be a kind of long-term vision. Okay, I would like to do this ideal restoration in my landscape, and I have this vision with the 10 principles. This is why we prepared this document at the beginning, and I think it will be useful. But maybe, James, you want to complement?
Yes, thank you very much, Christophe. The issue of stakeholder involvement is really a critical one. What we have found is that in many forest and landscape restoration projects where stakeholders have not been involved, they have failed. And so it really is important not to have just a top-down look, but to have a bottom-up approach as well. And it's not easy. It can be very time-consuming because you have to build the trust of the local community. You have to have a lot of outreach. You may have to have trainings to do this. It's not an easy thing. But if you don't do it, and the ecosystem is dependent and reliant on the interactions of those people, it's going to fail. It's just what happens.
And one more point about that. You can't do restoration at the local level without the local communities. It won't be sustained. You therefore need to listen to them, understand why they are managing their landscape the way they are doing it. There are reasons for that. So unless you understand that, your change will not stand, or the change you may bring willingly, though it is scientifically sound, it will not stand.
Okay, thank you. We've got just one time for one more question, maybe to Angela. We've heard about these principles and recommendations. How will you now go about in disseminating it to ensure, like we were talking about, that everybody needs to be aware of this and kind of help to follow the principles? So this is a question from online to you. How you want to go about to disseminate to ensure everybody is aware of these principles and can adhere to them?
Well, I can speak on behalf of the Commission, for example, on ecosystem management of IUCN. We are working in partnership with the Society for Ecological Restoration, and I think that one of our next steps is to precisely to start disseminating these experiences. I want to invite people interested to follow our monthly webinars that are dealing with different components of ecosystem restoration, science and practice. So there you can find many examples. Recently there was a presentation of the principles, of the key messages, and we are continuing with that. I think I want to highlight and recall that the greatest value of ecosystem restoration is that it's context dependent, and of course we need to make sure that the planning at national level, subnational level are coherent, and there are no contradictions, and that the activities are aligned, but also making sure, as Luke and others have mentioned already, the importance of engaging with the local people and the stakeholders, because otherwise this may create trade-offs, and the trade-offs for us is I would say is the main key message, because there is where we need to get the balance, the ecological balance together with the social balance. No? Because we will never go back to the original conditions of the ecosystem, no? That's for sure.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to close the session for now. I can maybe invite Luke to do the final closing remarks, because fortunately we don't have enough time for more questions.
Well, thank you, and thank you for attending this session, and more so, thank you for taking the message and becoming an agent of change. And if you are already an agent of change, then become a transformer based on what we know is available. So my key message is the one that you can see on the screen. We must view actually any degraded ecosystem as our underperforming asset, awaiting for our care and investment to thrive again. The think piece that we have released here, the principles are providing science-based rationale for action. So it's now for all of us, now let's go back to work, and to work from our walk of life. Everyone can take action. It's not the farmer only, it's not the forester only, even the consumer can take action. Thank you very much, indeed. So we're done.
Okay.
Thank you.
1 hour.